Tonight on Global National, Prime Minister under pressure. Mark Carney embarks on his first official foreign trip to shore up alliances against President Trump's trade war, while facing calls at home to trigger an election and disclose details of his personal investments.
They're supposed to recuse themselves from anything that would cause them to be in a conflict of interest.
Nightmare nightclub fire. The terrifying moments pyrotechnics sparked a blaze that killed dozens in North Macedonia. Still suffering. 5 years on, the warning from Canadians with long COVID. Plus, tariff travel tiff. How the trade war is changing flight routes and prices.
I think this is going to be great news for Canada's travel and tourism industry.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Jeff Semple.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. Canada's new Prime Minister is embarking on his first trip abroad. Mark Carney is making quick stops in Paris and London before then traveling to Iqaluit. A destination not on his itinerary is Washington, though President Trump's trade war is expected to dominate those discussions. Carney is Canada's first unelected Prime Minister in 4 decades and is facing pressure at home to call an election. Our Ottawa Bureau Chief, Mercedes Stephenson, is traveling with the Prime Minister. So, Mercedes, what is the political strategy behind this foreign trip?
Jeff, a big day for Prime Minister Mark Carney. Today is his 60th birthday, and on this day, he is making his debut on the world stage, embarking on his first foreign trip as Prime Minister of Canada, just 2 days after being sworn into the job. Prime Minister Mark Carney will travel to Paris and London to start his inaugural tour, an opportunity to present himself as a statesman capable of playing in the big leagues. Shoring up support from allies across the Atlantic is critical right now, especially in the face, Jeff, of an increasingly erratic policy towards Canada from the Trump administration. Visiting France and the UK offer stable, supportive meetings that give him a profile without the risk of a visit to the Oval Office, where Mr. Carney could find himself getting the Zelensky treatment. That would be a risk for the Canadian economy, Jeff, as well as for Mr. Carney's potential election fortunes. You can imagine the attack ads of an Oval Office visit gone wrong. And that election is expected to come sooner rather than later, with the Liberals likely looking to have the writ drop before the House returns on March 24th.
All right, Mercedes, and what is Carney hoping to accomplish in these meetings over the next couple of days?
This visit has a number of goals, but prime among them diversifying trade away from just the United States, as well as talking about collective defense and security. Concerns about NATO and Ukraine, including a possible contribution of troops to a peacekeeping force for Ukraine, are also expected to be something that could be talked about. And military procurement is another topic on the agenda as Canada reconsiders buying major acquisitions like the F-35 fighter jets from the U.S., given the current administration's comments and stance. Mr. Carney will also be making a key stop in Canada's Arctic, up in Iqaluit, to reassert Canadian sovereignty and security in the wake of Donald Trump's bombastic comments about Canada's defense spending and Canada's claims on the Arctic. Jeff?
Mercedes Stephenson, thanks. As the Prime Minister focuses on shoring up those alliances abroad, the opposition here at home is demanding more transparency on Carney's financial dealings. The Conservative Party says Carney should immediately disclose all of his investments. Carney told Global News that he's placed his assets into a blind trust. David Akin reports on the politics of the Prime Minister's finances.
Good morning. We're here today because Mark Carney has failed to come clean with Canadians about his financial interests and his conflicts of interest.
The Conservatives have been trying to make this point for weeks, that Mark Carney's financial assets, especially stocks or stock options he holds in his former employer, Brookfield Asset Management, ought to be a matter of public record.
True allegiance to His Majesty, King Charles III, King of Canada.
Especially since he's now the Prime Minister.
Why does that matter? When it comes to public office holders like the Prime Minister and like ministers, they're supposed to recuse themselves from anything that would cause them to be in a conflict of interest.
Carney was in Montreal Sunday, marching in a St. Patrick's Day parade. After that, he met with Quebec Premier François Legault. He wasn't taking questions from reporters Sunday, but
Prime Minister Carney, I'm Jillian Piper with Global News.
Global News did ask him about his finances after his swearing in.
How can Canadians know that there's no conflict of interest if they don't know where the assets come from?
The assets are in a blind trust. So, and can I point out that for those who don't follow this, I have 6 months to put, or 120 days to put the assets in a blind trust. I already have put the assets in a blind trust.
Still, he has not provided details about the kind of assets he put into that trust, their value, or the identity of the trustee.
The assets that I have were earned through employment. Employment income, employment as a public servant, and employment in the private sector. And I would note as well that employment in the private sector is something that the Leader of the Opposition has never experienced.
Now, many of the details journalists and Carney's political opponents are seeking now will eventually come to light. The law requires the Ethics Commissioner to publish them, but not until September, well after an election expected to be over by the end of April. Jeff.
All right, David Akin in Ottawa. Thanks, David. One of BC's largest universities is cutting jobs. About 70 faculty members at Kwantlen Polytech University have been issued layoff notices. And it's not the only post-secondary institution in Canada struggling with job losses. As Neethu Garcha explains, school officials are blaming the federal government's cap on international students.
Kwantlen Polytechnic is one of the largest universities in British Columbia to announce layoffs because of fewer international students.
It's shock, it's anger, it's sadness. KPU has a lot of money, and so there are a number of strategies that could be used.
The Faculty Association believes the cuts to be unnecessary.
There's multi-million-dollar plans for administrative expansion and administrative salaries, so why can't those millions of dollars be used to protect faculty jobs?
But leaders at the institution, like many others across the country, point to Canada's cap on international student permits.
We've seen 1,500 fewer international students, and we expect to see that many next year. And given the reduction in international students, we don't have as many classes to teach, and so that is why we are facing these layoffs.
In BC's interior, Okanagan College says it's dealing with an $8.3 million deficit and announced 35 possible layoffs.
Those policy changes are going to culminate in, we believe, about a 50% drop in our international student population next year. That equates for us to almost 1,000 students.
Last month, McGill University announced it's facing a $45 million deficit for the next fiscal year.
Institutions are huge economic drivers in all of our communities.
The BC Federation of Students says the crux of the issue dates back to the 1990s. Provincial and federal governments started reducing funding for public post-secondary institutions, which then relied more and more on international student tuition to fill the gaps.
The generation that got to enjoy a publicly funded post-secondary system are now the generation that is defunding that system.
Bracing for continued fallout of the cuts, the BC Federation of Students says the solution is more stable operational funding. As it prepares for a federal election, they plan to be in conversation with the federal government about its role in ensuring this happens. Neethu Garcha, Global News, Surrey, BC.
The Trump administration said today it had deported hundreds of alleged Venezuelan gang members. They were flown to El Salvador and Honduras. The move defies a federal court order barring the White House from doing just that. President Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act, an 18th century wartime law, to speed up mass deportations of alleged Venezuelan gang members who Trump claims are terrorists invading the United States. Rescue crews worked through the night in a coastal Syrian city after an explosion brought down a 4-story building. At least 16 people are dead, including children. The blast was caused by unexploded ordnance left over from Syria's 13-year civil war. Aid groups have warned that up to 300,000 munitions used during the conflict never detonated and now pose a risk to civilians. Terrifying and tragic scenes are coming out of the European nation of North Macedonia tonight. At least 59 clubgoers, including many teenagers, were killed after a fire broke out inside a busy nightclub. This video captured the moment the ceiling catches fire as a band was performing, flanked by fireworks. Crowds gathered outside the hospital in the capital, waiting for any news of their loved ones. One young woman who lost her sister described the panic as people tried to escape through the building's only exit. Maria Tseva says she fell and was trampled as she tried to escape. She says the club was packed with around 1,500 people. Police have arrested 15 suspects in connection with the fire, including the nightclub's owner. Millions of Americans are in the path of a violent storm system tonight that has already killed at least 36 people. The deadly storms produced more than 40 tornadoes across 8 states, from the Midwest down to the Deep South, decimating homes and businesses. In Missouri, at least 12 people are dead as residents there search for survivors among the debris. As Candace Cole reports, the powerful winds are also fueling raging wildfires.
Communities are reeling after severe weather ravaged parts of the southern U.S., leaving a trail of devastation from powerful tornadoes that touched down in Kentwood, Louisiana.
I heard a puff of wind out here. Something sounded strange, and when I opened that door, it just blew the glass out of that door, and then it blew me through the house.
To Alabama, where 2 people were killed and chicken farms were taken out in the town of Gordo.
So I called up a friend of ours who has a basement for shelter, and he says, get to my house now because there's 2 of them headed your way. And so we loaded up and we left.
Oh, man! This tornado hit Tylertown, Mississippi, destroying cars and a camper, taking the lives of 3 people, including a 7-year-old boy.
All I could hear is my 6-year-old screaming that she didn't want to die. You know, and you don't want to hear that coming out of your baby's mouth. And, you know, my husband saying, please, God, let my family be okay. Please, God, please, God, please, God.
A lot of families that are displaced right now.
In Oklahoma, wildfires consumed nearly 300 structures, including homes. Governor Kevin Stitt says dry, windy conditions caused fires that were lit to control vegetation to get out of control.
There's about 170,000 acres that were burned. We're still trying to track down how did these fires start. We think some of the power lines contributed to this.
We were really shocked to see our home still standing, to be real honest.
The violent weather is not over yet. 50 million people from Florida to Pennsylvania are now bracing for that same deadly storm system as it touches down in the eastern United States. Candace Cole, Global News, Washington.
Caught on camera. Coming up, a delivery driver badly burned by Starbucks tea wins an extra large payout. This Starbucks drive-through security camera captured the moment a venti-sized tea fell from a takeout tray onto a delivery driver's lap. Well, now a jury in California has ordered the coffee giant to pay the driver, Michael Garcia, $50 million in damages. His lawyer argued that the cup's lid was not properly secured in the tray. Garcia suffered severe burns from that accident 5 years ago. Starbucks is now appealing. The COVID-19 pandemic was declared 5 years ago this month, and millions of Canadians are still suffering from symptoms of long COVID, a condition that can be debilitating. Scientists are learning more about how the virus can cause long-term and sometimes invisible damage to the body. But as Julia Foy reports, they've yet to find a cure.
As rain fell onto hundreds of pillowcases lined along the steps of the Vancouver Art Gallery, the messages from those suffering from long COVID symptoms could still be read. Pain, confusion, and overwhelming fatigue.
It's been really hard. I'm, 5 years in. I'm still disabled. I can't work. I can't study. I'm mostly housebound.
We first met McLean back in 2020 when she was recovering from COVID symptoms.
Shortness of breath will come back. My voice will get hoarse again. I'll start coughing, headaches.
Saturday's long COVID event was organized to give a voice to those suffering with this poorly understood condition.
We need more research. We need the long COVID clinics across the country to be reopened and staffed with physicians who are trained.
We have 2 long COVID clinics in the Lower Mainland. They have a 6 to 9 month wait time and over 2,000 patients waiting just to be seen.
A Toronto doctor involved in several research projects on long COVID agrees that 2 clinics in BC plus 11 in Quebec are far from enough.
In terms of having funding for long COVID care,
The rest of the provinces and territories do not, including Ontario, which is the most populous province in Canada.
In the fall of 2024, the Canadian COVID Antibody and Health Survey reported that out of 40 million Canadians, 64% had had COVID, and 3.5 million Canadians had longer-term symptoms. Cheng warns that people must not assume that COVID is dead.
One of my patients on Friday, I would say that didn't get long COVID the first round, didn't get long COVID the second round, but with the third round of infection, got long COVID.
As the world remembers the COVID pandemic, those still suffering are hoping to be heard.
Please acknowledge us. Please just, say the word post-COVID, say the word long COVID.
Julia Foy, Global News, Vancouver.
Still ahead, changing course, why some Canadian airlines are scrapping routes to the U.S.
Crew 10, welcome aboard the ISS.
A SpaceX capsule successfully arrived at the International Space Station today, carrying 4 astronauts who will spend the next few days learning the station's ins and outs from fellow astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams. Those two have essentially been stuck on board the ISS for 9 months. They were supposed to only be there for a week, but their capsule was deemed unsafe for the return journey. The two are expected to finally reunite with their families back here on Earth later this week. U.S. President Donald Trump's taunts to make Canada the 51st state has led many Canadians to avoid traveling to the United States. Bookings to the U.S. are down and cancellations are up as Canadians spend their tourism dollars elsewhere. And Gaviola reports on how the travel industry and airlines are responding.
I didn't take it as a joke. For me, it was a very serious threat, and it was a very serious insult.
Zena O'Keel changed her flight from Los Angeles to Cancun, Mexico, like many others, making a statement with her travel dollars.
The constant jokes about annexing Canada, Canada being the 51st state, and that coming from the mouth of very high-level political leaders, just put a very sour taste in my mouth, and the tariffs as well.
A trend that's forced Canadian carriers to scrap some routes to the U.S. in favor of domestic destinations. Between the weak loonie and growing backlash against America, changing sentiment is forcing the tourism industry to recalibrate.
Already a month and a half ago, Canada's airlines noticed a decrease in bookings. And in fact, one airline I know of was seeing more cancellations in one day than new bookings.
With our core season really picking up around Victoria Day weekend in May, that's when we might start to actually see cancellations.
One silver lining, discounts on domestic travel this spring.
There's going to be good deals for consumers, but I think more than that, I think it's going to be great news for Canada's travel and tourism industry.
This aviation analyst recommends choosing unique Canadian destinations that are off the beaten path.
Well, I've got to tell you, we've got some areas the Northwest Territories, west of Yellowknife, Nahanni Federal Park Reserve, that are just would blow you away.
But the deals may not be enough to convince households and businesses to spend on travel during a period of heightened uncertainty.
Business and consumer confidence on both sides of the border has been tanking.
One thing to watch, a pullback on travel spending may be a sign of broader financial hardship.
The travel industry, aviation in particular, always represents the leading edge of an economic slowdown or a recession.
Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
Going green, still ahead, Canada's oldest St. Patrick's Day parade marks a special milestone. A classic St. Patrick's Day tradition is back in Chicago this weekend as the city dyed the Chicago River shamrock green. That dye is actually orange, and then the river turns green once it mixes with the water. Officials assuring the public the dye is environmentally friendly. St. Paddy's Day is actually tomorrow, so on a Monday this year. So many people were celebrating this weekend instead, and that includes in Montreal, where thousands packed the streets for the city's annual parade. And as Phil Carpenter reports, this year marks a lucky milestone.
of all the St. Patrick's Day parades that have happened in Montreal over the years, this one is probably the most special.
I know that. That's why we're here. I'm almost 200 years old. It's all good.
She's joking, obviously, but the fact that this is the city's 200th St. Patrick's Day parade is a source of pride for the city's Irish diaspora, even if some have trouble wrapping their head around it.
Pretty insane. There's not much that goes on for 200 years in the city. It's amazing. It's an incredible tradition, yeah.
It's one of the longest running St. Patrick's Day parades in North America and even predates the one in Dublin, which started in 1931. One reason the Montreal parade is so successful, some believe, is the depth of the Irish community in the city. The shamrock on the Montreal flag speaks to that history, and the desire among the Irish diaspora here to hold on to their culture.
Very conscious of the links that have now developed, both trade, both cultural, between Ireland and Canada as a result of the way in which the Irish were treated.
Another reason that keeps coming up, the fact that Montrealers treasure the city's diversity and take every opportunity to celebrate it.
Today, we're all Irish people. We're all Irish today. This is such a great opportunity for Montrealers to be together, to celebrate, to say who we are, what we stand for.
Even new Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney was in town to recognize the milestone, but a few spectators think a major part of the parade's success is an excuse to party.
I'm very proud to come to this. It's a great parade. It's a great time for everybody to come out and be together.
And the best thing about the celebration?
The booze. The people. The people. The people.
Here's to another 200 parades. Phil Carpenter, Global News, Montreal.
Cheers to that. That is Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Jeff Semple. Tonight's Your Canadas are Binscarth, Manitoba, Bay Roberts, Newfoundland and Labrador, and Crystal Beach, Ontario. Keep them coming. Send your pictures of Canadian pride to Global National at globalnews.ca. Thanks for watching. Donna will be back tomorrow. Have a great night.